Hi, I'm Lori Patch with the Empower team at Keller Williams Realty, and we are hosting a lunch and learn today about investment property in real estate and looking at it from the perspective of a property manager. And we have with us Evan Goeglein, who is with Integrity Property Management, which has offices in Grants Pass and Central Point. And so, Evan, take it away.
Thank you. Lori. Well, I appreciate the invitation to talk about real estate investing. Sometimes I'm asked to talk about landlord-tenant law, which is fun too, but even more fun is talking about the investing side, which is why we do what we do. So I've been in business for 5 years. We got started because when my wife and I got married, she already owned her own home, and so she had some experience with one of her previous jobs in property management, so she thought, well, we'll just rent it out. And I said, are you crazy? We're going to sell it. But I'm glad that I listened to her because real estate has turned out to be a wonderful investment for us. And as I wanted to learn how to properly landlord. I took all the classes and did research online because I didn't want to do something that I would regret. And that's when I started learning about real estate investing and saw that this was such a good investment and a vehicle for building wealth. And so that's what I kind of hope to share with you all today. So I think that real estate is one of the best investment vehicles there are. I think a lot of people maybe are hesitant to enter real estate as an investment because of the potential downfalls, some of the risks, which we can talk about. But as a comparison against, say, stocks and bonds or mutual funds, I think there's a lot of advantages in real estate over some of those asset classes. So I think some of the reasons for investing in real estate, first and foremost, is the ability to leverage the investment, which means that you can get financing to help purchase your investment. So imagine if you went into the bank and you asked to take out a loan to say, I'm looking to buy some mutual funds, I'll pay 20%, you pay 80%. The bank is probably going to laugh you out of the room. You can't do that with paper assets, but you can do it with real estate. And one of the great advantages is that there's so many options to obtain a home loan to purchase real estate. So you're leveraging that opportunity. So one of the online communities for real estate investing is called Bigger Pockets, and one of the creators there coined the term, as far as I know, BRRRR, or B-R-R-R, BRRRR. It stands for Buy, Rehab, Refinance, Repeat. And so what his strategy is that if you have some capital, or maybe you pull it out of a HELOC from your personal residence, you take that capital and buy a property that needs some improvement. You rehab that property, get a tenant in there, get it rented, and then you go refinance. And because you added value by rehabbing it, you can refinance for what you actually bought it for, what you have into it, and then you have your capital back to go do it again. So just as an example, let's say you buy a house for $250,000, you put $30,000 into it, and then you get it rented and go to refinance, and it appraises at $325,000, and you're doing an 80% LTV or loan to value, you're going to get all or most of that money back. That is cash flowing because you have a tenant in there paying the mortgage down for you, and you can take that capital and go do it again and again and again and again. So that's just one example where there's financing to obtain real estate, which you can't really obtain in other investment vehicles. You can also use that real estate as collateral towards other investments. Banks are a little less crazy about doing HELOCs for investment properties, but there are some out there that will do it. So if you have an investment property and maybe you already have a first mortgage on it, if it pencils, it makes sense, you can maybe get some more money out of it through a HELOC and use that on another investment towards your next real estate project. So this is what I mean by leverage. You can use financing in ways to obtain more assets that you can't do with most other investment classes. The other advantage, I think, to real estate is that it is a hard asset. And that is particularly appealing in these days where we hear about some banks closing and you're worried about maybe your FDIC limit being exceeded. And so with the hard asset, you have something tangible that you can actually touch. So as an example, seeing some CDs offered at 5%, and 5% sounds really great for a CD compared to interest rates we've seen in the past. And the idea is that you would put money in a CD for 5% and say a year later you get that money back plus 5%. The question though is, are you outpacing inflation? Is that money still worth as much as it was when you put it in and when you got it back? And maybe not. The idea with a hard asset is that you buy a property and years down the road you have this hard asset that is worth the value of that current market. So it has kind of a inflation resistance built into it. This is why you hear all the advertisements right now for gold and silver and precious metals, because of that uncertainty in the stock market or in the banks closing, things like that. The idea is that you could take a gold bar and bury it in the front yard, and 10 years come back, and that would have more buying power than if you took $1,000 in cash, buried it in the front yard, you come back in 10 years, you can buy less with that cash than you did when you bury it. And the idea with gold, for example, is that you have more buying power when you pull it out of the ground. The difference between real estate and, say, precious metals, though, is that real estate is income producing. When you bury that gold bar in the front yard, it's not giving you any money, it's not putting you any cash in your pocket. So those are some of the benefits of, I think, real estate being a hard asset. Another advantage, speaking of hedge against inflation, is that debt, going back to number one again. So if you borrow money today and you get a 30-year fixed and you're paying on that mortgage for the next 30 years, inflation is eroding the value of that money. So you're borrowing it as its value today, and in 30 years, as you're still paying that mortgage off, you're paying back at money that is less valuable, but the amount that you're expected to pay is the same. So hard asset real estate and then debt are two great hedges against inflation in these curious times. The other nice thing about real estate is it's insurable. Again, you can't do that with your mutual fund, you can't do that with your stocks and bonds, but you can get insurance on your real estate. So if the worst happens and the place burns down, then you can get that asset replaced through an insurance policy. And most landlord policies include a rent loss for that event. So your property burns down, not only are they going to pay to have it rebuilt, but they're going to be paying you for what your loss of income is every month because it's an income producing property. There are some companies now too that are offering what's called landlord protection insurance. So during COVID, we saw eviction moratoriums where tenants weren't paying, and so landlords weren't getting paid. Well, this insurance would kick in for tenants that aren't paying. It also covers things like malicious damage. So if a tenant just decides to take a sledgehammer and knock out all the walls for some reason, this insurance covers those kinds of damages as well. So the fact that you can insure your investment, I think, makes it a stronger investment than, say, other classes. In real estate, you're building wealth in 4 ways simultaneously, which is, I think, very exciting. The first way is the appreciation. So you buy a property at a certain value today, let's just say $300,000, and into the future, that appreciates. Maybe 10 years later or 5 years later, depending on the market, it's worth $400,000. So in the course of that time, you just made $1,000 in the value of your property. Now, certainly market prices can go down. The trend is always, though, when there's dips to eventually go back up. So if you're planning on holding your real estate for a long term, then a dip doesn't really affect you because you're still collecting rent even though the values have gone down. It would only hurt you if you have to sell and the point of your sell is lower than the point where you purchased. Otherwise, you're making money as home prices go up, as they seem to be trending that way, or have been at least. The other way that you're making money is the mortgage pay down. So your tenant pays you rent, and then you take that rent payment and use a portion of that to pay down your mortgage. And within your mortgage payment is an interest payment and also the principal, and you're paying down the principal of the loan with each payment. So let's just say, for example, let's just assume the appreciation stays the same, the value of the property doesn't go up. Even if the value of the property doesn't go up, every time you make your mortgage payment, you're gaining equity, which means you're making money every mortgage payment you make. So what this is saying is that you're doing both of those at the same time. Your property is gaining in value, hopefully, if the market's right, and your mortgage pay down is lowering the balance, so you're creating more wealth every time the mortgage is paid. The other huge wealth building center in real estate is the tax benefits. I brought my trusty calculator to do an example. But let's say you purchase a property for $300,000, and the tax accountant, the CPA, will determine the value of those improvements. So the land isn't depreciable, but the improvements are. And sometimes they figure, say, 80%, just as an example. Sometimes they'll drill down. So that would mean $240,000 of that $300,000 purchase is the building, the structure that they built. And that is depreciated over 27.5 years. So if we take that 240 divided by 27.5, that is $8,727. So you get to deduct $8,727 every year, even though those aren't actual expenses that you see. Now that's really amazing if you think about it, because if you, let's say you bring in, $15,000 that year, and then you take those deductions off of all your expenses, repairs, landscaping, property management, any interest payments for your loan, all of that's a tax deduction, and then you have a certain number left over, but then your depreciation comes in and that wipes out $8,700, the chances are pretty good that you won't owe any taxes because of that depreciation. And if on paper you're a negative, you put money in your pocket, but because of depreciation it's on paper a negative, you can use that to offset other tax obligations. So a lot of the big real estate investors, they buy a lot of real estate for the depreciation just to offset their other tax obligations, so that every year they're not really paying anything in taxes legally because of all the depreciation they can claim. And then the fourth way that you're building wealth in investing in real estate is the cash flow. So after you take your rent and you pay all your expenses and your mortgage, you have money left over, that's money in your pocket, and that is another way that you're building wealth. So with all four of these going at the same time, it's a fantastic wealth builder. It's a great investment. So what makes a good real estate investment? Well, first I want to point out that there's different classes of real estate. First, there's residential, something we're probably thinking about. You're providing a home for a tenant to live in. But there's also commercial classes of real estate. There's retail. You could buy a store for a tenant to move in to sell their products out of. Retail has been on the decline on a national level, probably because of the online retailers. A lot of people are buying from Amazon and wherever. And so retail has been in decline, more so probably in the malls and things like that. There's also office buildings. You could buy an office building and let it out to business owners as tenants. Office buildings are also in decline, particularly in the big cities, because of remote working during COVID. We don't have to drive into work anymore. But I think in the more rural towns, office rentals are still strong. One that's really strong on here is medical. Now that might be the same as office, but medical, particularly being a property that's set up for a doctor's office or a dentist's office, those always have a lot of attraction in our area. And then there's something called mixed use, which means that there's both residential and commercial in one building. So you might see apartments up above, and down below is a retail store or a restaurant. Those are becoming really trendy in development right now. And then there's agriculture. You could buy farmland and let it out to farmers and make income that way. We'll focus today on residential because that's what most of us are thinking about. That's what my experience is in. And so you might divide it into possibly 3 categories. There's single family dwelling, which is of course just a home that you live in. It's intended for 1 family unit. And then there's also 2 to 4 unit multifamily. And then there's 5 unit or more multifamily, would be like an apartment building. And the reason that 2 to 4 is distinct from the 5 unit is because of the financing changes when you go above 4 units. For a conventional, conforming loan that you would get from any mortgage lender, they can do up to a 4 unit multifamily building. So that would be your 30-year fixed rate that we're used to getting when we buy our primary residence with a little bit higher interest because of investment property. Once you get into a 5 unit, then you're going to be looking at getting a commercial loan, something like that. So what are some of the pros and cons of these different kinds of real estate, residential real estate? Well, I think there's some advantage to a multifamily building. One advantage is that you have multiple units paying rent, so if one tenant moves out, you still have some income coming in while you find your next tenant. So if you have a 4-plex and 1 tenant leaves, 3 are paying rent while you look to replace your other one, which you don't have in a single family. If you rent out a single family dwelling and your tenant gives notice and it takes a month to turn it over, you're not collecting any income for that month. Maybe one advantage for a single family dwelling over multifamily is maybe you get a little bit higher quality tenants. There are a lot of great tenants who have fantastic jobs and are looking for a place to live. They just would choose not to live in a multifamily setting. They don't want to live in an apartment building. They don't want to live in a duplex. They're looking for a single family dwelling. And I think you'll probably get a little bit higher quality tenants with a single family dwelling. But typically, because you're paying for all the infrastructure, you're maybe not getting quite the return on investment as you are in a multifamily setting. One advantage also of multifamily is that if you're doing a system where you're trying to get a conventional loan from a bank and finance your investment properties, there's only so many of those you can do. For a Fannie Freddie loan, most banks will let you have up to 7 in your name. I've heard of some banks going all the way up to 10. But if you have 10 Fannie Freddie loans, they're not going to give you another one. And so if you think about it, if you buy 10 4-plexes, you could have 40 units with those 10 loans versus 10 single-family dwellings, you would have 10 units. So there might be some advantage of investing in multifamily from that perspective as well.
Quick question?
Yes, please.
If you have them in the name of an LLC, does that then give you 7 or 10 more?
No, it doesn't.
It does not.
I mean, well, not for the Fannie Freddie loans, because they want to see it titled in your personal name anyway.
Gotcha.
They don't like financing an LLC. But that said, you could bundle them up in a commercial loan and get those financed, and then you freed up your Fannie Freddie slots to go buy with conventional loans. That's a real common practice, is bundling several properties in a commercial loan. One other quick advantage from a landlord-tenant perspective is that there's certain carve-outs in Oregon law for owner-occupied duplexes. So in Oregon law, it can be difficult to terminate a tenant who has been in longer than 1 year unless you have a reason or a cause to do so. And which is hard sometimes. You have to prove it in a court of law that they violated a lease, and they have to have done it twice. So that can be difficult. But if you're in a duplex and you're the owner of the other side, then you can terminate them with just no cause termination with 60 days notice if you live in a duplex and you rent out the other side. So there's a big advantage to owner-occupied duplexes. Or owner-occupied any multifamily is an advantage too. If you could buy a 4-plex outright, live in one, and rent out the other 3, you could retire right there. Just That would probably cover your living expenses for those other 3 units. So there's your retirement plan. So how do we analyze a real estate investment? Well, there's various metrics of determining what is the value or investment potential of a particular investment property. The most common metric is the capitalization rate, or known as the cap rate. And the way that's figured is by taking the annual net operating income, known as NOI, divided by the purchase price. And so basically what the cap rate is telling us is, what is the return on investment if you had bought this property all cash? Because the NOI, or net operating income, is the net. So you take your rent income minus all your expenses, but not counting your mortgage payment, not counting debt service. And the reason is they want to see how your property performs regardless of your loan. How is it at performing a return? Okay? So just as an example, let's say there's a property that's worth $300,000, and the rent income on this property over the course of a year is $24,000, and expenses all added up are $10,000, and that's a NOI, or net operating income, of $14,000. You take $14,000 divided by the $300,000, and you get 4.6. So this would be a 4.6 cap rate. Now, what is a good cap rate? That's a very relative question. Cap rate is really beneficial of comparing one investment next to another. So you can say, okay, here's a property, here's a property. Once we pay all the bills, what is its ability to give a return on investment? So there's really no answer that you should have X for a cap rate. Markets will shift. There was a time, when I got into real estate, that you'd be looking for a 7% cap rate. It'd be really hard to find 7% now. I think cap rates around 4 or 5 are just kind of the going rate right now, but it just depends on what someone can live with. Yeah.
These always mess me up.
Okay.
So you're dividing the 14,000 by 300,000?
Right. So you take 14,000 divided by 300,000, it'll give you a decimal, 0.046. So that's 4.6%. So you're putting the NOI on the top and 300,000 on the bottom. Okay. And then some people believe that a cap rate should always be higher than the interest rate of your loan. That kind of makes sense, because if your cap rate is your return on investment and you're paying interest at a higher rate, then the argument goes that you're losing money. The reason that's not hard and fast true, though, is because you're only paying interest on the portion that's loaned when the cap rate is a representative of the entire value of the property. And also, the cap rate is really a snapshot when you buy, because the value of the price could go up from there. And ironically, a price that goes up is a lower cap rate. I mean, once you purchase the property, you want the value to go up, right? If you figure all things considered, that rents are going to be increasing every year, that the value of the property is going to go up, that you're saving all this money on taxes, if you consider all of those things, that's called an internal rate of return, or IRR. It's kind of speculative, because who knows what the property is going to be worth in 5 years or 10 years. But if you could calculate all of those things, you'd probably want that number to be higher than the interest rate. So I wouldn't be too concerned if you find a property that has a cap that's lower than the interest rate, especially these days, as long as you have good cash flow. Okay? So let's do a little experiment. You give me a second to switch over to screens, and we'll just run some examples. Okay. All right, so I have a spreadsheet that I use to just plug in information. You guys see that okay? Yeah. Okay. So let's just play around with some numbers. Let's say I purchase a property for $315,000, In this scenario, I'm just gonna not finance it, it's gonna be purchased all cash, and then year built doesn't really matter, but let's just say it's 1990. Okay, and then let's say that the rental income on this property is worth $2,000 a month. I pay about $150 in taxes per month. Insurance is about $50. By the way, the insurance that you would purchase for a rental property is usually much lower than your homeowner's policy. Because when you have homeowners, you're protecting yourself against, other liabilities of things that could happen. When you purchase a landlord policy, you're really just buying flood and then protecting yourself from the liabilities that a tenant might have against you. Like, I tripped on the hole that you didn't fix or something like that. Utilities, let's say we're paying $50 a month in utilities, no HOA. Landscaping, let's say, let's not go crazy. Let's go, say landscaping is 100. Okay, now that's pretty much what most people do, is they taxes, insurance, utilities, and maybe landscaping HOA. There are some other things to consider when you're figuring out what an investment property can do. One of them is vacancy. It's not very likely that your property will be rented 100% of the time. And so when you have a unit that's vacant, you're losing money. Every day that your rental is not rented, you're losing money. And so if you bake that into your calculations, then it's not a big deal when you do lose a tenant. You're like, oh, well, I calculated for that. If you do have 100% occupancy, then it's just a better return. So I plug in 3%. That's just a quick estimate that I do, but you can just kind of budget however you think. Repairs. Now, somewhere a quick rule of thumb came along that you'll spend 1 month of rent per year in repairs. So if this rents for $2,000, then this is estimating that we'll spend $166. We should budget $166 a month in repairs. Now that's just a rule of thumb. Obviously, anything can happen. A tree branch could grow through a sewer line, and you're probably going to be spending a lot more that year. If it's an older property, you'll probably have a lot more repairs. If it's a newer property, you'll probably less than that. So you just have to kind of do your best estimation. And then the other figure would be capital expenses. The difference between capital expenses and repairs are the things that we can anticipate are going to happen. Someday we're going to need a new roof, right? Someday we're going to have to paint the interior and exterior. We know that those things are coming. So as a quick rule of thumb, I just do 4% on the rental income. The way to do this in a more precise manner is to actually look at what is the age of the roof. How many years do I have left on it? How much does a new roof cost? And divide that out per month or by year, and you can kind of add that in. So once you kind of figure, okay, well, these are the expenses that are coming up, I better start budgeting for them, and you can know how much you need to tuck away every month for capital expenses. And then property management. Now even if you decide to self-manage, it might be good to put something in the line here just because you will have expenses. And if you ever go to sell it, you can prove that it's a good cap rate even if you pay a property manager. So that's a good idea to kind of calculate that in either way. Okay, so this is what the numbers came out to for us. NOI is $11.44 per month, and so our cap rate on this property would be 4.36%. Okay? Now, I want to do a little bit of an experiment and see what can we do to increase the cap rate. So if the cap rate is the purchase price, or the net operating income divided by the purchase price, how do we get that cap rate up? One way would be to increase revenue. So if we buy a property and let's say there's an opportunity to raise rent, let's say the tenants are under market and we're going to say, you've been living under market for a while, now we're going to raise rent. Now our rent is $2,200 a month. What did that do for our cap rate? Brought it to 4.99. Okay, well let's say there's a storage shed at the property and we want to offer that to our tenants for a monthly rental fee. Maybe we can get $50 a month out of a storage unit, or a special parking spot or something like that. Well, that can be added in there, and that takes our cap rate to 5.18. So you see, by increasing the revenue, then we're increasing the cap rate. Well, that's not the only way to do it. What's another way besides just increasing revenue? We could decrease costs. That's right. So one of the ones that I think sticks out a lot is landscaping. Landscaping is just awfully expensive. One of my vendors in the Medford area, his minimum charge is $200 a month just to do weekly service on a property. That's what it's worth to him to bring his equipment out to the property and do work every week. So you think about that, that's $2,400 a year you're spending on landscaping. One thought might be, well, first of all, you could look for properties, or you can convert properties to a zero landscaping yard, so there's just not much to do. You can maybe put the responsibilities of landscaping on the tenant. Now, I always say that you'll probably get at most the lawn mowed. Don't expect the roses to be properly trimmed and things like that, but that could be something. And then for $2,400 a year, you could probably have a landscaper come in twice a year and just do a big cleanup, and maybe charge you $200 per visit or $400 per visit. That's still going to be saving you money in the long run. Okay. So let's say in this scenario we're able to take out landscaping. That brought the cap rate to 5.56. And then let's say we're going to have the new tenant coming in is going to start paying their own trash bill. Let's say that drops utilities to 20. So we've just got that cap rate up to 5.68. Okay. So by adjusting income and expenses, we can make this a better performing rental property. Now there's one more thing that we can try to do, get a good cap rate on an investment property, and that is at the purchase price. Maybe we find a motivated seller. Maybe through strong negotiations we can negotiate down to a lower price. There might be something that you can do. Maybe you can close faster because you're going to buy it cash with your HELOC, and you can close in 20 days or whatever, and then you'll refinance after you close. Those might be some things that you could negotiate a lower purchase price. So let's just say you get this down to 307, just playing around with numbers. What's that do for the cap rate? 5.22. So helps a little bit. So those are some ways that you can try to make your real estate investment perform a little bit better. Okay. All right, so I think we have some properties to actually run through this scenario and see how it goes. Are there any questions at this moment?
What would you say locally in general is the cap rate on?
It's so hard. It's so hard to say. As I just kind of play around with numbers, I'm not seeing things get real high. So I'd say 4 or 5. Yeah. There might be someone who has more experience on the sales side, because since I work in the management side, I don't necessarily see the cap rates as much, but just as I look at properties that come up, that's about what I'm seeing. But since you asked, let's look at a property. I think Laura provided some handouts to a couple of duplexes, and I have them here too. So this one is 1117 Southwest Bridge Street. You guys have the data on that one? Okay. Oh, I didn't plug in the internet. No wonder it's not working. Well, you guys will have to help me then. You'll have all the data. Oh, did it work?
I saw it.
I didn't hook up to the Wi-Fi. I should have. No worries. You guys will help me. So what's the purchase price?
$415.
Okay. Okay, we won't look at financing right now. We're just looking at cap rates. So we'll just ignore that for now. What year was it built?
That was a 70.
1970.
70?
Yeah.
Okay. And that doesn't really matter. I just have it in here because typically older properties demand more in repairs. So. Okay, now what was interesting about this one in the description, I saw that the listing agent said this could rent for $4,800 a month. If you, it's in the details there, and so they're kind of counting all that. Let's just do that. Let's play around with $4,800. Now, one little thing though is not to rely upon the listing agent's performas or estimations, because they are giving the best case scenario in all things. So it's better to kind of find from the rental market what it could realistically rent for. But since this is just an exercise, I think this would be fun. $4,800, sure. Okay, does it say on there what the taxes are for that property?
$2,627.
Okay, so monthly that would break down to $218. Insurance is tough. I think for a multifamily, you might be around 65. Insurance rates are going up with all the wildfire stuff going on, so that'd be something to keep in mind as you price things out. You know, if you're just kind of doing a quick analysis of a property, you can just estimate like I did. But if you get serious about buying a property, go ahead and call your insurance agent and say, I am really interested in this property. Can you give me a quote on insuring it? And they should be able to give you an estimate. Also be careful of like flood zones and things like that that can increase insurance quite a bit. So utilities, does it say on there by chance what utilities are included in the rent? I don't remember that this one did. So one of the things that we should be careful of with multifamily is that when developers put in a duplex or a fourplex, they're only getting one city hookup to the for the water and sewer. And so typically, the property owner gets one bill from the city, and unless you have sub-meters to know what each tenant is using, you usually have to just eat that bill. I mean, you have to include it in the rent. There are ways to do it, but it's a pretty delicate legal process, so it's probably best just to include it in the rent. So that's going to increase utilities for multifamily quite a bit. I have a duplex in Grants Pass, and the water sewer bill ends up to be around $220 a month. So let's say on utilities here, maybe they throw in trash or something else. Let's call it $300. I don't think this is an HOA. Probably not. That'd be surprising. Landscaping, based upon the pictures, does it look like there's any landscaping to do? I think it's mostly...
Looks like gravel or...
Yeah. We'll say 0 on that.
It says low maintenance landscaping.
Okay, that's great. All right, so vacancy, I again have 3% on here. Repairs, that's probably a little high, $800 a month. Let's just drop that down to $500 just to be reasonable. Capital expenses again, you would want to probably go in and look at the property. How old is the roof? How old is the HVAC system? Maybe the water heater. When's the last time it was painted? And calculate. Okay, if I'm 2 years away from a new roof, my capital expenses are going to be way higher than if I'm 17 years away from a new roof. So that will change that number quite a bit. And then property management. You know, I plugged in 10%. That's what most of my clients are on for my services. There are companies that do lower services, but then they have a bunch of kind of fees along the way. And so it ends up being about 10% either way. So I'll do 8.39, so that looks really good. The big question is going to be, are you really going to get that $4,800 a month? That's going to be the real question. So.
And it's an old building.
And it's an old building.
1970.
1970, yeah. So
What if you just did, can you do it at like $4,000 a month?
that's why I do the spreadsheets, because it's so easy to play around. See, that drops it quite a bit.
Yeah,
So-
because it's
so-
still decent.
Yeah, well, it is decent, yeah. So I mean, because of the landlord-tenant laws in Oregon, as I mentioned before, if a tenant has been in longer than a year, you can't give them a no-cause termination, and we have rent control in Oregon, so you can only raise it so much per year. This year it's 14.6%. There's a bill being considered right now to lower that cap to the lesser of 3% plus CPI or 10%, whichever is lower. So with inflation going crazy, they tied the cap rate to CPI, the Consumer Price Index. So with inflation going crazy, the cap rate this year ended at 14.6%, and the Oregon legislature said, "That's too much. We have to put a cap on the cap." So the point though is that if you buy a property with tenants in place that have been there longer than a year and their rent is below market, there's a limit how much you can increase their rent. So if it's a under market rent, and they're after the first year, you're gonna have a tough time getting that revenue line up. Okay, so that's something to really look out for. And for agents, if you're possibly gonna be representing people selling their investment property, they need to plan ahead to get their rents to market before they go to sell, so it looks like an attractive investment. Or sell it vacant. People prefer to buy investment property with at least one unit vacant because they can put in whoever they want.
And could they do that at the current market rate, if it's just a vacant unit?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so rent control is on the tenant, not on the unit. Yeah, good question. Okay, well, let's do another one. 306 Northeast D Street. What's the list price on that one?
$412.
And we'll do 0% down. Oops, I meant to say 100% down. What's the year on that one?
1990.
Okay, so that's a newer property. Now, on that one, I did see the one unit was vacant, the other one was rented for what was it, 800 something? Does it say on there? Let's say 875. That's sticking out to me. And I think the other unit, if it's similar to that one, could probably rent for more than that. It was a 1-bed, 1-bath. I want to say around 800 square feet, something like that. I think you could get 1,000 a month for a unit like that, at least. So let's say 1875.
This actually says it was $895.
895, okay. Okay, let's just call it 1900. Okay. Taxes on that one.
$2,015.
So 168 a month. Insurance, let's just say 65. Utilities, it's a Grants Pass duplex, so you're gonna be paying a lot, at least in water, sewer. HOA probably not. Landscaping, does that one have?
It has grass. Looks like maybe a couple bushes.
It says rent includes garbage land.
Ah, there you go. So if it includes all those utilities, maybe you want to increase that to maybe 300. And then landscaping, let's just say at least $100. That's probably being a little generous. Again, when we add in vacancy, repairs 316. I think we did 500 on the other one, so 317 is probably an okay number. Better to be more conservative. Capital expenses, again, you're going to want to look at the condition of each part of the property management. This one comes out to not so good, 1.83. Right. Right.
Will you share this spreadsheet with us?
Yeah, I can do that. It's just, I mean, it's something I put together. So I hope it works good. Now here's maybe, this is extra credit, okay, where you didn't have to pay for this part. As an experiment, let's go back to this one that looked like a good cap rate. 6.47, a lot of assumptions in there. Now let's play around with what it might look like if we got a loan. So going interest rate, anybody know? For a single family residential.
Right now, probably 6.
6? So you're gonna probably pay about 0.5% for multifamily and 0.5% for an investment property, so you're looking at probably about 7% on a loan. And let's just see what it looks like if we put 50% down. By the time you pay your mortgage, which is $1,380, you'll have a cash flow of $856. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's putting 50% down. What happens if we put, say, 35% down? Your cash flow is $442. Now that's after you're budgeting for capital expenses and repairs. So that's really true profit. So what this number does then on cash ROI is it's just considering what you're putting into it. So for, what did I say, 35%, your down payment's gonna be $145, your closing cost, this is just a guess, $8,300. So all in, you're invested $153. And if you're getting $442 a month, then you're getting a cash on cash return. So that's not the return of the property, it's a return on the actual money you're into it, about 3.46%. So, but that's only the cash, right? Remember, your property is hopefully gaining value. You're getting tax deductions. Your tenant's paying down your mortgage for you. So all of those things are working together at one time. So you're getting better than a 3% return on your money, but that's just your cash. So, okay.
What if you're only putting 20% down?
What if? Which would be great. Well, so on investment property, they'll probably have you put 25% down to avoid PMI on investment property. No, that's oftentimes 20%. And these things change all the time, so maybe, so that's only at $28.20 you put 20% down. So if you have all of your capital expenses budgeted for, your repairs are budgeted for, you're paying for landscaping and all your utilities, if you're clearing even $100 a month, that's going to still be a good investment. Some people like to go more like $300 a month. But you know, everybody's different. Some people invest for the cash flow. They want to invest so that they're going to be getting a lot of money every month. You know, we talked before about putting your money in a CD. If you could put your money in real estate and you're getting $800 a month, and you probably want to invest for cash flow. You know, so I'm way over. I'm so sorry, but
No, that's very good. I have a question about the vacation rentals.
Yeah.
Do you manage those?
I don't. I'm asked a lot about it. It's just a whole nother business, because my business is really asset protection. I'm making sure people's investments are protected. I'm enforcing the lease. In that business, you're in the hospitality business. You know, you make sure the sheets are not wrinkled when the guests get there, and they call, there's no toilet paper, and so you have to deliver. You know, so it's a whole nother business. I have been hearing from people who are in it that Southern Oregon is becoming kind of saturated with vacation rentals. It's getting harder and harder to compete with other people who are doing it. And the ones that like the Airbnb websites are promoting are the ones that have a uniqueness to them. You know, so I saw a TV ad where they converted like a bus into and so that's, you know, flashy. So Airbnb website's going to promote things like that more than just a humdrum, you know, normal property. So you're really kind of slave to the technology of how they're going to be promoting your business.
So given that what you just said, have you ever compared, do you feel that the things you said about why real estate is a good investment are less true for the short-term rentals? Is that your opinion?
So on gross revenue, I'm hearing that it's about the same or a little bit better. The big downside is that you're always working for it, because you're dealing with guests checking in, you're dealing with reservations, or you know, you could probably find management to do all that for you. Whereas with a tenant, you sign a lease and they let you know when things need to be repaired, you go do your inspections, but it's a lot less, it's more passive than a vacation rental, which is more of an active business.
Do you have a certain number of times that you go and do like a site visit for a property you're managing?
Yeah, I do internal inspections twice a year. And and I would recommend at least that. I do my first one 2 months after moving, and then I do it every 6 months after that. Any other questions?
Can you give a quick rundown of like all of the services including in hiring you for property management?
Oh, sure. Thank you. So it's full service management. So we take care of everything. We'll market the property for rent, screen qualified tenants, and that's the other big piece. Doing your inspections is the big piece, and then doing good screening is the other big piece. So we're going to be looking for tenants to have 3 times gross household income of the rent, a credit score of at least 600, 3 years of positive landlord history, and then we'll verify and check their references and make sure all that checks out. So then when maintenance requests come up, we'll process those by dispatching our vendors. We use third-party contractors that can take care of all of the repairs and handle the billing. So if you want the utility bill to come to us, we'll pay that bill from your rent income and then pay out the net to you. And then you get monthly financial reports, yearly financial reports, and then when that tenant does finally move out, we handle the turnover, get it ready for the next tenant, and start the process all over again. So most of our clients are on a package that does 10%. We have some other packages that include like the insurance we talked about and some maintenance things. That's 10% plus $89 a month. And then we also have a package at 7%, but there's a fee to move someone in, $500. And then we don't do the utility billing through that system because that's actually a lot of the work is paying the bills every month. So if you don't need the bills paid and you don't anticipate there being a lot of repairs, that might be a better fit at 7%. Thank you.
You also do all of the documents for like if they didn't pay their rent on time.
Yeah, notices. Yeah, that's the enforcement side of the lease. So when you find that your tenant's out of compliance, you really need to act. There's something that people don't realize in landlord-tenant law. There's a waiver that a landlord can create. So if a landlord is aware of a lease violation and does not send a notice within 3 months, then the landlord has waived his right to enforce that part of the lease anymore. So let's say a tenant has an unauthorized guest and you're aware of it, but I don't want to be a stickler, we'll just not say anything. And then 5 months later, this other occupant becomes a problem. You can't say, well, no other occupants are allowed. Well, you knew about it, you didn't do anything, so you can't enforce that anymore. So it's important to actually enforce the lease that you sign with your tenants.
And you take care of that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the nasty part.
Yeah. Well, so here's the truth. I mean, as self-managing landlords, we are more relationship focused because we're running a business. Our tenants are our customers, believe it or not. And so we tend to let things slide. But when I'm a fiduciary for my owner, so I have an obligation to enforce those things. So there's kind of a cliche in property management to say, we'll manage your rental as if it's our own. The truth is, we manage it better because when it was just my property, I could let things slide, no big deal, but I can't do that with my owners. I have to actually be a good fiduciary, so, it's an obligation upon us, so. Okay,
No more questions?
No?
thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Evan. That was just jam-packed with information.
Good.
Pages of notes.
Great.
We'd love to have you come back.
I'd love to.
We really appreciate your time.
Sure.
Next month, our Lunch and Learn is the first, whatever that Wednesday is, in June. And Megan Gerard from Country Financial will be talking to us about how to document and keep track of your possessions so that if you do have to file a claim, it is substantiated. And I think that's also going to be a very good session. So join us then. Thank you.
Okay.